Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into two terms that you've probably heard quite a bit, especially around like the tech world, Agile and Scrum.
Yeah, they get tossed around a lot.
Oh, they do?
And sometimes even like interchangeably.
Yeah.
But there is a difference.
Oh yeah, there's a big difference.
And understanding that difference can really be impactful.
Huge.
Especially if you're, involved in any kind of project.
Right.
It could be software development. It could be planning your next vacation.
Yeah, for sure.
Just understanding how these things work.
So to help us break this down, we've got a ton of sources today, articles, case studies, even some real world examples. But first, what exactly is Agile? I feel like it's not just about moving fast.
No, it's not just about moving fast. It's more about adaptability and responsiveness. So think of it like you're driving down a winding road.
Okay.
You constantly have to kind of adjust to the curves.
Right.
Agile is kind of like that.
Yeah.
It's embracing uncertainty and empowering teams to make decisions as they learn and gather feedback.
So less about like sticking to a rigid plan and more about being able to pivot when you need to.
Exactly. And there's this great document called the Agile Manifesto that lays out the core principles. It prioritizes individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software, over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration, over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan.
I'm seeing some themes here. It sounds like flexibility and collaboration are really at the heart of it.
Yeah.
But how does that actually translate into real world work? That's where I think Scrum comes in, right?
That is where Scrum comes in. So think of it this way. If Agile is the philosophy of cooking a delicious meal, Scrum is the specific recipe that guides you through the process.
Okay, I like that.
It provides the structure, the roles, the events to help teams actually implement Agile principles.
So if I'm trying to, say, launch a new product or even just organize a big project at work, Scrum can help me apply those Agile principles to get things done.
Absolutely. And one of the key elements of Scrum is this concept of sprints. So these are short, time-boxed iterations, typically 2 to 4 weeks long, where teams focus on completing a set of tasks.
So instead of trying to tackle this huge project all at once, you break it down into these smaller, more manageable chunks.
Yeah.
I can see how that could make things less overwhelming. But what about the roles within a Scrum team? Our sources mentioned a few that sound pretty important.
Yeah, so there are 3 primary roles in Scrum. First, you have the product owner. Think of them as the voice of the customer, the one who defines what needs to be built and prioritizes the features. Then there's the Scrum Master. They act as a facilitator, ensuring the team adheres to the Scrum process, removing any obstacles that get in the way. And then finally, you have the development team. Those are the skilled individuals who actually design, build, and test the product.
So it's a real team effort. Each role is playing a crucial part. But what about the actual work process? How does a Scrum team operate within those sprints?
Well, each sprint begins with sprint planning, where the team decides what they're going to work on, how they'll approach it. Essentially, they create a to-do list for the sprint, drawing from a larger backlog of tasks. Then, throughout the sprint, the team has daily stand-up meetings, which are very short, focused check-ins to discuss progress and any challenges.
Those daily stand-ups sound like a great way to keep everyone on the same page and address any issues as they come up. I bet that helps prevent those small problems from snowballing into major setbacks.
Absolutely. It's all about transparency and communication. Now, at the end of the sprint, there are 2 very important events. First is the sprint review, where the team demonstrates the completed work to stakeholders and gathers feedback. And then there's the sprint retrospective, a time for reflection and process improvement. The team discusses what went well, what could be improved, and how they can optimize their approach for the next sprint.
So it's this continuous cycle of planning, doing reviewing, and adapting. It sounds incredibly dynamic and collaborative. But I think it's time to tackle the elephant in the room, or should I say the Scrum in the room. What's the real difference between Agile and Scrum? I feel like they seem so intertwined.
Yeah, that's the big question, right? Remember, Agile is that guiding philosophy, the why behind wanting to work in a flexible and collaborative way. Scrum is a specific framework, how you put those principles into practice.
So Agile's the mindset, and Scrum is the toolbox providing the structure and tools to make it happen.
You got it. And while Scrum is one of the most popular frameworks, it's not the only way to be Agile. There are other methodologies like Kanban and Lean that also embrace the Agile philosophy, but offer different approaches.
So it's about finding the right approach for your team and your specific needs. But I think a lot of listeners might be wondering, why should they care about all of this? How can understanding Agile and Scrum benefit them in their work or even their personal lives?
That's an excellent question, and one we'll explore more as we get into the real-world applications of this. But just think about it. We live in a world that's constantly changing, where adaptability is key.
Right.
Embracing the principles of Agile, whether you're leading a team, managing a project, or even tackling your personal to-do list, can help you navigate that uncertainty and achieve better outcomes.
Sounds like a pretty valuable skill set to have in today's world, no matter what field you're in.
Absolutely. And one of the most compelling aspects of Agile and Scrum is their focus on delivering value quickly and iteratively. Rather than spending months or years developing a product behind closed doors, you're constantly getting feedback and making adjustments along the way.
Makes a lot of sense. It's about staying connected to your customers or stakeholders, ensuring that what you're creating actually meets their needs. But before we get too deep into the real-world applications, I am curious to dig a little deeper into the differences between Agile and Scrum. Our sources highlight a few key distinctions that I think would be helpful for our listeners to understand.
Absolutely. Let's unpack those a little bit. One key difference really lies in their structure. So Agile, like we've been talking about, is more of a philosophy, a set of values and principles, whereas Scrum is much more prescriptive.
Okay.
It provides a clear framework with specific roles, events, and artifacts.
So Agile is like a guiding compass pointing you in the right direction, while Scrum gives you the detailed map and a set of tools to help you navigate the terrain.
That's a great analogy. Think about it this way. Agile says, be flexible, collaborate, and focus on delivering value.
Right.
Scrum says, here's how you do that. Have a product owner, a Scrum master, a development team. Conduct sprints, hold daily stand-ups, review your progress, reflect on how to improve.
So Scrum provides that practical framework to actually implement those Agile principles.
Exactly. For instance, Agile emphasizes minimal documentation, but Scrum utilizes specific artifacts like the product backlog and the sprint backlog for tracking progress and making sure everyone's on the same page.
It sounds like they really complement each other beautifully, with Scrum giving you that concrete structure to put Agile into action. But you know me, I love real-world examples. Do our sources have any stories about companies or teams that have successfully used Scrum?
They do, and some of them are quite fascinating. For example, there's a case study about a software company that was struggling to keep up with the rapidly changing demands of its customers. Their traditional project management methods just weren't cutting it.
Yeah.
They were constantly behind schedule,
Right.
over budget, and delivering products that didn't quite meet the mark.
I've been there. It's frustrating for everyone involved, especially the customers who are waiting for that new feature or product. So how did this company turn things around?
They decided to embrace Scrum. They trained their teams, adopted the framework, and started working in sprints. And the results were remarkable. They saw a significant increase in productivity. Their time to market improved dramatically.
Nice.
And most importantly, they started delivering products that their customers loved.
That's what it's all about. So Scrum helped them become more efficient, more responsive, and ultimately more successful.
Precisely. And it's not just software companies.
Oh, really?
Our sources also highlight examples of Scrum being used in marketing, education, healthcare, and even government agencies.
Wow, it's more versatile than I imagined. But let's go back to that software company for a minute. Can you walk us through what a typical sprint might look like for them?
Sure. Imagine they're working on a new mobile app. During their sprint planning meeting, the product owner would present the most important features they want to see in the app for this particular sprint.
Okay.
Maybe it's a new user interface or a key integration with another service.
Okay, so they've got their goal for the sprint. What happens next?
The development team would then work together to break those features down into smaller tasks.
Okay.
And estimate how long each task will take. This helps them create a realistic sprint backlog, a plan for what they can realistically achieve within that 2-week time frame.
So they're mapping out their game plan, making sure everyone's aligned on what needs to be done.
Exactly. And remember those daily stand-up meetings we talked about?
Yes.
This is where they come into play. Each morning, the team would gather for 15 minutes, typically standing up to keep it brief and focused.
Right.
And each member would share what they worked on the day before, what they plan to do today, and any obstacles they're facing.
It's like a quick pulse check to make sure everyone's on track and to address any roadblocks before they become major issues.
Right. And this is where the Scrum Master plays a crucial role. They're there to support the team, remove impediments, and ensure the process is running smoothly.
So the Scrum Master isn't just a meeting facilitator. They're a problem solver and a champion for the team.
You got it. Now let's fast forward to the end of the 2-week sprint.
Okay.
It's time for the sprint review.
This is where they get to show off what they've built right.
Right, exactly. The team demonstrates the working software to the stakeholders, showcasing the new features and gathering feedback. This is an opportunity to celebrate accomplishments, get valuable insights, and make any necessary adjustments based on stakeholder input.
I bet that feedback loop is incredibly valuable. It ensures that the team is building something that truly meets the needs of the users. But what happens after the sprint review?
That's when the team gathers for the sprint retrospective.
Okay.
This is a time for reflection, a chance to look back on the sprint and identify what went well, what could be improved, and how they can optimize their process for the next sprint.
So it's not just about building great products, it's about constantly learning and improving the way they work together.
Precisely. Scrum fosters a culture of continuous improvement, not just for the product itself, but also for the team dynamics and the processes.
Hearing about this software company's success with Scrum is really inspiring. It makes me wonder if there are any potential downsides or challenges to using Scrum.
That's a great question and one we should definitely address. While Scrum can be incredibly effective, it's not a magic bullet, and there are certainly potential pitfalls to be aware of.
I was hoping you'd say that nothing is ever perfect, right?
Right.
So what are some of the common challenges teams might encounter when implementing Scrum?
One common challenge is resistance to change. Adopting Scrum requires a shift in mindset and often involves breaking down traditional hierarchies and ways of working. Some team members might be hesitant to embrace this new approach, especially if they're used to more traditional project management methods.
That makes sense. Change can be difficult, especially in a work environment. What are some other potential challenges?
Another challenge is the potential for Scrum to become too rigid or bureaucratic. Remember, Scrum is a framework, a set of guidelines, not a set of rules etched in stone.
Right.
If teams become too fixated on following the Scrum process to the letter, they might lose sight of the underlying principles of agility and flexibility.
So it's important to strike a balance between structure and adaptability. You don't want to let the process become the goal.
Exactly. And another challenge can arise if the roles within the Scrum team aren't clearly defined or if team members don't fully understand their responsibilities.
I can see how that could lead to confusion and conflict. It's like trying to bake a cake without knowing who's responsible for adding the flour or preheating the oven.
That's a great analogy. Without clear roles and responsibilities, things can quickly fall apart. For example, if the product owner isn't empowered to make decisions about what features are prioritized, or if the Scrum Master isn't given the authority to remove obstacles, the team can become bogged down and lose momentum.
So it's not just about implementing the Scrum framework, it's about ensuring that the team dynamics and individual roles are aligned with the principles of Scrum.
Absolutely. And it's also crucial to have buy-in from everyone involved, from the team members to the stakeholders. If there's resistance or a lack of understanding from key players, Scrum is unlikely to succeed.
That makes sense. It's like trying to row a boat where everyone is pulling in a different direction. You need everyone on board and paddling in sync to move forward effectively.
Exactly. And speaking of moving forward, I think it's time we shifted our focus to the bigger picture. We've explored the ins and outs of Agile and Scrum, but what does it all mean for our listeners? Why should they care about these concepts?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We've covered a lot of ground today, from the core principles of Agile to the practical applications of Scrum. But what's the takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that the principles of Agile and Scrum aren't just for software developers or tech companies. They can be applied to any project, any team, any industry. Whether you're launching a marketing campaign, organizing an event, or even just tackling your personal to-do list, embracing Agile principles can help you be more adaptable, efficient, and collaborative.
It's got a whole new way of thinking about work and getting things done.
Exactly. It's about embracing change, working iteratively, and focusing on delivering value. And that's something we can all benefit from, regardless of our profession or our goals.
Absolutely. But before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder. Considering what we've learned about Agile and Scrum, which approach might be more beneficial in your work or personal projects? Do you thrive in a more structured environment with clearly defined roles and processes, or do you prefer a more flexible, adaptable approach?
That's a great question to consider.
Yeah.
And there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It really depends on your personality, your team dynamics, and the specific project you're tackling.
It's like choosing the right tool for the job. If you're building a house, you need a detailed blueprint and a structured approach. But if you're painting a landscape, you might want more freedom to experiment and adapt as you go.
Exactly. And sometimes a hybrid approach, borrowing elements from both Agile and Scrum, might be the perfect recipe for success. The key is to be mindful of your goals, your resources, and the people you're working with.
It's fascinating to think about how these concepts, which originated in the software development world, can be applied to so many different areas of life. It's like a universal set of principles for navigating complexity and achieving better outcomes.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think the beauty of both Agile and Scrum is that they encourage continuous learning and improvement. It's not about finding the perfect process, but rather about constantly iterating, adapting, and evolving your approach to achieve better results.
So our deep dive today wasn't just about understanding Agile and Scrum. It was about sparking a curiosity about new ways of working, about challenging the status quo, and about finding the approaches that empower you and your team to do your best work.
And that, I believe, is the most valuable takeaway of all. That's a great question to consider, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It really depends on, your personality, your team dynamics, and the specific project that you're tackling.
It's like choosing the right tool for the job, right? If you're building a house, you need that detailed blueprint and a structured approach. But if you're painting a landscape, you might want more freedom to experiment and adapt as you go.
Exactly. And sometimes a hybrid approach, borrowing elements from both Agile and Scrum might be the perfect recipe for success. The key is to be mindful of your goals, your resources, and the people that you're working with.
It's fascinating to think about how these concepts, which originated in the software development world, can be applied to so many different areas of life. It's like a universal set of principles for navigating complexity and achieving better outcomes.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think the beauty of both Agile and Scrum is that they encourage continuous learning and improvement. It's not about finding the perfect process, but rather about constantly iterating, adapting, and evolving your approach to achieve better results.
So our deep dive today wasn't just about understanding Agile and Scrum. It was about sparking a curiosity about new ways of working, about challenging the status quo, and about finding the approaches that empower you and your team to do your best work.
And that, I believe, is the most valuable takeaway of all. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Yeah, this was a great deep dive. Until next time.